ILTV on the hour, bring you the biggest stories from Israel and the Middle East. I'm Shosh Bedrosian, and today is day 657 of the war in Gaza. Let's get into all the top headlines at this hour. We start with developing news out of Kfar Yonah near Netanya, where 8 people were injured in a suspected car ramming attack at a bus station. Police say they located the car, but are still searching for the suspect, who they say fled from the scene with their vehicle. A manhunt is now underway in the West Bank, where security forces closed several crossings, including the road leading into Tulkarem. 5 of the victims are in moderate condition, and 3 are lightly injured. And Axios is now reporting there have been improvements in Hamas's most recent response to the ceasefire and hostage proposal on the table, but a source tells them there are still significant gaps that remain and that the terror group will need to be significantly flexible so a deal can be reached. Meanwhile, Hamas is, quote, wasting time, according to a source that spoke with them about the terror group's unacceptable response to the current ceasefire and hostage proposal that's on the table. With no urgency in their response to ending the war and bringing a ceasefire to their own people, war rages on, with Arab mediators lambasting the terror group to return to the table with a better response, after officials say Israeli negotiators are bending over backwards to get a deal done. Their initial response was deemed unacceptable, that negotiators so much so did not want to share this information with the U.S. and Israeli officials. After Hamas sought for a larger IDF withdrawal from the border of Gaza, clear language on the ending of the Israeli and American-backed GHF, and an increased amount of prisoners released for each Israeli hostage. But now their latest response is reportedly workable in some capacity. Even though they have softened their response, Israel is now reviewing it. All of this as U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff is in Italy to meet with Qatari and Israeli officials.
Special Envoy Witkoff is headed to Europe, where he will meet with key leaders from the Middle East to discuss the ongoing ceasefire proposal to end this conflict in Gaza and to release the hostages. These are very sensitive negotiations that are currently taking place. I spoke to Special Envoy Witkoff last night about them. I will let him speak further on the matter, but the President and Special Envoy Witkoff has made the administration's goals clear. We want this ceasefire to happen as soon as possible,
And turning now to the situation inside of the Gaza Strip. For the first time since the war, President Isaac Herzog was in Gaza to be briefed on the war and the distribution of humanitarian aid there. Now, during the unprecedented wartime visit, the president met officers and reservists to discuss the current status of the war. Commanders presented Herzog with an operational update that included a briefing on the distribution of humanitarian aid to Gazan civilians. Herzog said the true obstacle to this aid is the terror group Hamas. Herzog insisted that Israel remains adamantly committed to the rules of international humanitarian law. He pointed out that Israel is an army largely of reservists who travel abroad, and it was critical that Israel make it clear that it operates according to international law. Meanwhile, he spoke about the need to secure a deal. Let's take a listen.
זאת המשימה הכי בוערת. יש עכשיו משא ומתן אינטנסיבי בזכותכם, בזכות הפעילות שלכם וכל מי שנלחם בעוטף וכל מי שנלחם ברצועה. אתם מביאים לנו בסוף את החטופים בחזרה, ואני מאוד מקווה שנראה את הבשורה שתוכל להביא לנו גם שינוי אזורי משמעותי. אנחנו פועלים פה על פי הדין הבינלאומי.
And all of this as a new offensive started this week in the city of Deir al-Balah. That's the first time IDF ground troops are on the ground inside of this Hamas stronghold city, all while there's pressure for Hamas to finally come to the table and agree to release the hostages and stop holding their own people in the besieged enclave or conflict to end the war. Joining us now to discuss is Dr. Harel Chorev, a senior researcher at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Hello, Shosh. Thank you.
I first want to discuss the IDF's operations inside of Deir al-Balah. What are the first few phases the IDF will likely want to accomplish inside this new ground offensive?
Well, that's a good question, because it was a very temporary. It took just a few days to execute this operation, And I think there was something pinpointed there. Otherwise, I can't explain why they did that. Obviously, to create some pressure on Hamas, but I guess that they also took advantage of another goal, which we don't know at the moment. But surely we will know later on.
But going back to that for a moment, in terms of the IDF operating there, we know that there could be hostages that are held in Deir al-Bala. What does the IDF do in a situation like this to prevent and to protect them, prevent them from any harm in these types of operations? It's very obvious as to why hostages might be in Deir al-Bala, right? There's a massive refugee population there. It's a Hamas stronghold city. What can the IDF do to protect these hostages?
The simple and sad answer, Shosh, is that there's no way to prevent such a hazard, such a danger to the hostages. You can't avoid it. It's a war. And at the end of the day, someone is calculating the risks and decides to do that. It's unavoidable. In other areas as well, for example, the Khan Yunis, for example, we see that the IDF didn't occupy the whole area, and the reason is very simple. There are hostages there, and the IDF is avoiding from occupying it. Nevertheless, it's impossible, to work on a sterile sphere that prevent any danger to the hostages. It's just impossible.
Right. But my question goes back to you for a moment. Hamas clearly uses the hostages as leverage in this conflict, right? Because without the hostages, what power really would Hamas have in negotiations besides the Israel wanting to get them out of power? But they hold on to these hostages for a reason, to negotiate with. Would Hamas want to protect these hostages in a situation like this while IDF troops go into Deir al-Bala?
It would, because as you rightly said, this is their only asset. This is their strategic asset. Without it, they would be gone for a long, long time ago. This is their only asset. The only thing that prevents us from, for 2 years already, from going into a full-scale war. There's no other thing, no other judgment that would prevent us from conducting a conventional war at the area. It's just the hostages. And Israel, we need to understand, this whole thing takes a long time because Israel is promoting two goals that are not contradictory, but they're surely, delay each other. One is the hostages, the other one is destroying Hamas. Now, we can't say that Israel didn't destroy Hamas. I can tell you for a fact that Hamas is in a very, very bad and serious situation. Nevertheless, if we would just focus on destroying Hamas, we would probably sacrifice, quote unquote, our hostages. And nobody obviously wants to do that. So we need to compromise on both, and it takes time to promote them both. And Hamas is fully aware of this asset, no doubt about it.
I mean, you mentioned there that Hamas is in a bad situation, but the optics look a bit different when it comes to negotiations for a ceasefire and a hostage deal, because right now it seems as if Hamas has all the control. You have 4 countries, the US, Israel, Qatar, and Egypt, all waiting on Hamas to agree to this proposal on the table right now. So how much control do they really have in terms of this conflict, in terms of this war?
First of all, let me start with the very question. So if they're so weak, how come they're still insisting? The thing is that we are used to think in a very conventional warlike thinking, okay? Like, okay, we won the war, so why don't you give up? We're dealing with jihadists. And jihadists think differently about the way they achieve the goal. Just compare it to what is happening with Yemen, with the Houthis. It looks different, okay? They're launching rockets at us, but in the core of it, it's the same. They are jihadists. They will never give up, even if you will kill everybody who is surrounding them. So first of all, we need to understand that it doesn't reflect on the real situation. The real situation is bad, extremely bad, but it still doesn't make them less tougher about getting their maximalist goals from the beginning. It doesn't mean that they will win, but it means that they don't have anything else, to achieve in this devastating war.
Is there anything these countries can do, though, in negotiations to pressure Hamas into making a deal? Like for example, we have Qatar, who, of course, is a big playmaker and is part of funding Hamas in many ways. What more can Qatar do? Well, what would be something to make them do this deal? What would they need to do, Qatar?
Definitely, Shosh. All those negotiators, and not just the negotiators, other countries such as Turkey are can be very instrumental here, because they harbor those terrorists both in Turkey and in Qatar, and therefore they can put a lot of pressure. If they want the war to be over, they can put a lot of pressure on Hamas. I have no doubt about it. They can expel those leaders such as Khalil al-Khia, the leader of Hamas. They can do other things. When did we learn how extensive, for example, Qatar's power is? It was right before President Trump's visit to the area. I was following, the negotiations with Hamas all the time, but let's say around a month before before Trump's visit, we were, really on the threshold of moving forward with the deal. And all of a sudden, Hamas did a U-turn, nothing to talk about it, only a full deal, nothing to talk about. Then, all of a sudden, and obviously we all remember that Idan Alexander, which his picture we just saw, we all remember that Idan Alexander was a major part of the deal. And then a U-turn for a month. A day before President Trump arrived, all of a sudden Hamas is releasing Idan Alexander with not even anything from Israel's side to be paid. No prisoners, nothing. At that point of time, I've understood a very important thing, that Qatar's power over Hamas is paramount, is very, very big, and they could, because they could assure that the deal would be prevented only to be submitted to Trump as a present in his a day before, in a perfect timing, a day before his visit to the Gulf. By the way, it's not just an assumption. The Israeli intelligence could get the talks between among Hamas leaders, and to get it as a fact, okay, intercept their conversation. So we know for a fact that Qatar was involved in thwarting a deal a month before. If they could thwart a deal and time it to the perfect timing, I can assure you they can put much more pressure on Hamas as well.
Sure. We also know that there's, of course, immense pressure for the Trump administration to continue getting the rest of the hostages out, but specifically there are still 2 American hostages inside of Gaza held by Hamas, Itai Chen and Omer Nutra. I want to thank you so much for being with us today and joining us on this conversation.
Thank you, Shosh. Have a good day.
And Israel and Ukraine have reportedly agreed to initiate a strategic dialogue on the shared Iranian threat. This is after a meeting and a visit. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar met with President Zelensky. He said his message included a call for Israel's help in strengthening Ukrainian air defenses. Now, before the meeting with Zelensky, Sa'ar met with the Ukrainian defense minister as well and agreed the 2 countries would initiate this strategic dialogue on this threat. Sa'ar weighed in on the ongoing war with Russia, condemning Russia's airstrikes against civilians, and is calling for peace and security for Ukraine. And the humanitarian situation in Gaza has led to increasing international pressure on Israel, with the UN and aid groups saying food shortages are leading to hunger and famine amongst the Palestinian population. But Israel responds that it is Hamas that bears responsibility for deliberately creating a crisis situation in Gaza for their own purposes. For months, humanitarian aid organizations have warned that a shortage of food supplies in Gaza was in danger of tipping over into outright famine and starvation. Now they are claiming that predicted crisis has become a reality. Now, these officials say the blame lies with the new food distribution system set up by Israel and the United States. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was established to bypass aid groups and UN organizations after they were being exploited by Hamas to divert the aid for its own purposes. But the GHF has faced criticism for being ineffective and putting Palestinians at risk at the distribution centers. But let's remember, they have distributed millions of meals to Palestinians. But Israel says the food shortage is being deliberately engineered by Hamas, which has worked to sabotage the GHF in order to maintain its control over aid distribution. Let's take a listen to what an Israeli official has to say about it.
In Gaza today, there is no famine caused by Israel. There is, however, a man-made shortage engineered by Hamas. Now, too often, the full story is not being told. This suffering exists because Hamas has created it. The suffering exists because Hamas has made it so. Hamas hijacks the aid. They charge their own people. This is aid which is supposed to go to Gazans for free. It is their right to get it for free. Gazans are taxing that aid.
And joining us now to discuss all of this is Fleur Hassan Nahoum, the Foreign Ministry Special Envoy. Thanks so much for being with us today. Appreciate your time.
Hi. Thank you.
First off, tell me, what's your take on these organizations blaming Israel for the dire hunger situation that's in Gaza?
Well, you have to understand that, we're talking about Hamas, but Hamas has got some very good partners. And the partners of Hamas are the UN, because UNRWA was asked, and the UN, other UN organizations were asked right from the beginning of the new distribution mechanism to be a part of it, to take their experience and the distribution points, and they said point blank no. Now, what motivation does the UN have for rejecting a new mechanism that actually gets Hamas out of the system? And you have to conclude the fact that, unfortunately, UNRWA and the UN in Gaza has been completely infiltrated over the last few decades with Hamas employees, with terrorists that are working for their organization. Because why are they putting politics before the welfare of the people of Gaza? They could be helping. And at the moment, they're part of the problem and not part of the solution.
But why? I want to understand. We've been talking about this since October 7th, and also as more information has come out, the infiltration of Hamas in UNRWA and in other organizations. Why is this so not spoken about amongst this organization? Of course, it's a problem, right? And I think it would be hard for someone to publicly speak about this. But if there is an obvious situation here, why is it not being dealt with? Why can they not tackle the situation to fix this?
Because UNRWA and Hamas are one and the same. And that's what people to understand. 12 workers of UNRWA identity cards, UNRWA salaries were part of the 7th of October massacre. We have UNRWA workers hiding hostages. We have UNRWA workers killing hostages. Everything, the whole it's beyond rot. It is part of it. It is together. And that's what people don't seem to understand. They think somehow UNRWA is a separate entity. No. Employees of UNRWA are Hamas workers. When Yehia Sinwar and his family were found in a tunnel, that they just left the tunnel, they found an UNRWA identity card with him. And so we have to stop thinking of UNRWA as this outside organization. UNRWA is now Hamas. Hamas is now UNRWA. What other reason could there be for the so-called UN organizations not being part of the distribution of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation? I sat for dinner with one of the people leading the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And he said to me point blank that at the beginning, they asked all the humanitarian organizations working on the ground in Gaza to be a part of their mechanism. And they all, except for two, refused point blank. So like I said, UNRWA is part of the problem. The aid is there. The distribution is not being done for either political reasons or because they're scared. They're scared that Hamas are shooting at the aid workers that are trying to get the aid distribution to Gazans. Why? Because Hamas enriches itself and they function. This is their oil. They function on stealing humanitarian aid. It's part of how they're getting money into their coffers.
Right, it's used as complete control, not just with these organizations that you mentioned, but also of their own people. I actually spoke with a man in Gaza about a month ago, and he communicated to me that all of the food is being sold at exorbitant prices inside of the Gaza Strip. It's hard to buy things because Hamas has them. He says he actually saw boxes that said not for sale on them being sold, by groups inside of the Gaza Strip. It's a control mechanism. And that's even being said and reported by people.
None of it is supposed to be sold. None of it is supposed to be sold. It's all free aid. But Hamas commandeer it. They use it to control and they use it for money. And the world is blaming Israel as usual. And so you keep blaming Israel for a problem that is not caused by Israel, the problem will continue. But that's something that people have a lot of trouble dealing with because blaming Israel is the default.
I want to show our viewers right now a video that was released by the IDF. Actually, I don't know if we have it right now, but there was a video that was released by the IDF yesterday of Hamas operatives inside of a tunnel. There was specifically one man who was waving a fresh piece of mango, a fresh, unopened mango, screaming mango. There was music playing, but they were in the tunnels, right? And this is a way of Israel trying to showcase their side of the argument here, that look, really where the aid goes, it goes below the ground to benefit the operatives. That's Israel's perspective here.
Absolutely.
When you saw that video, did it surprise you? I'm assuming you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. I saw the video. And let me just add, those men looked very well fed. So nobody looked like there was starving. And then what made me, my first thought after the video is these terrorists in these tunnels are at the same time eating and feasting and starving our hostages. The only people starving in Gaza right now are our hostages that are still alive. And so, yes, I'm not saying there isn't food insecurity in Gaza, but the food insecurity, like the professor said before me, is artificially man-made by the Hamas that are still trying to keep control of the Gaza Strip. And the world, by condemning Israel, is actually making Hamas's rule last longer. If everybody was focused on making sure that Hamas, a genocidal terrorist organization prescribed in most normal countries, bringing them down from power and not attacking Israel, this war would have been over months ago.
I think we do actually have the video now. I want to play it for our viewers in just one moment. This is it on your screen right now. You can see these guys sitting on the ground. There's carpets in there, but you can see these concrete walls holding up grapes, bananas, mangoes. Yep, that's the shot of the mangoes we were discussing. But you can obviously see this is definitely underground.
Now, none of these guys look like they've skipped a meal. I think we can agree on that. And, and the libels keep going. Then what else do? They take pictures of very sick children. They're sick for different reasons. They're sick. Some of them have cancer. Another one has a congenital illness, all sorts of things. To take a picture and send it around the world. This is a starving child. Okay. When that child, unfortunately, looks that way because they're sick, because they don't have proper care, because they've spent all of their funding making tunnels and building up a terrorist infrastructure instead of focusing on their people. And these pictures go viral. They go around the world and say, look, there's a starving child. What nobody notices is that normally this child that looks starving but is in fact ill from some type of congenital illness or something else is sitting on a very well-fed mother. So you'd think, well, hang on a minute, I'm a mother. I know that I would give my kids all the meals before I ate. So I want people to actually think about what's going on here. This very concerted campaign that we see. And when you're looking through the lines, when you're looking between the lines, you actually see what's going on. And that is the abuse, the exploitation of people for the sake of a terrorist agenda and propaganda.
Yeah, the images of the children inside of Gaza are devastating. You see these people who, they had lives before. They did. These were also professionals at one point, people that worked every single day jobs that are struggling. Actually, going back to the point I made about this man in Gaza I spoke with about a month ago, he told me he used to have his own stores inside of the Gaza Strip, but he feels as if they are hostages as well, being held by themselves, by Hamas. They feel as if they are also hostages in this situation. And actually, this man made a very interesting comment to me. He told me that one day he hopes that his government will care for him the same way the Israelis cared for Idan Alexander, the American hostage who was just taken out. He says he would do anything for his own government where he lives to finally care about who these people are that live there, right? These Palestinians have suffered for so long.
Absolutely. They are all, and I say this in the mainstream media all the time, Hamas hasn't just taken Israeli hostages, they've taken an entire population of hostages. And they're hostages twice. They're hostages because they have never been taken care of. They've never been a priority. Sacrificing them, using them as human shields has been, in fact, their defense strategy. And they're also hostages because they're not allowed to leave the Gaza Strip. In many conflicts around the world, people become refugees from war. It happened in Syria. All of these millions of Syrians are in Europe today because they were allowed to escape a war zone, a dangerous conflict zone. The Gazans are not allowed to leave. Hamas doesn't let them leave, and Egypt doesn't let them come out.
Fleur, thank you so much for being with us and, of course, always sharing your perspective here on ILTV.
Thank you, Shosh.
And a quick update that we are getting into our newsroom right now is specifically about that ramming attack that took place near Netanya, just outside of that city. We are hearing right now from the IDF that 2 IDF soldiers were moderately injured, in addition to 6 additional soldiers who were lightly injured in that ramming attack early this morning. You can see the video on your screen right now. This is what that scene looked like. Of course, there were many crews on scene trying to investigate as the manhunt for the suspect is still ongoing. The IDF says the soldiers were evacuated to a hospital to receive medical treatment and their families have been notified. There are 8 people in total. It seems as if they are all IDF soldiers who were injured that were rammed in this attack. Police say that the car drove into and rammed the bus stop outside of Netanya. This is about 30 minutes outside of Netanya as well. So we are continuing to follow all of the updates on that. But this is the video on your screen of police working to investigate what happened, what led this person to it. We also know that there have been a manhunt that started inside of the West Bank as well. There has been closing the roads to the city of Tulkarem inside of the West Bank to search for this person. Unclear why that city. I'm sure more information will continue to come out from police and the IDF on this, but we are still working to learn some more details as well. But here on ILTV on the hour, we also have a new app. We want you to scan the QR code that you can see on your screen at any moment. This will be a 24/7 news app you can go to all the time for information, brand new news stories, all the latest updates that are coming out of Israel and the Middle East in real time. You'll be able to see all of the developments, every single conflict that we cover here from Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, and the greater Middle East as well. You can always make sure to subscribe to our app to continue to support ILTV and the independent journalism that we continue to do. And that's a wrap here on ILTV on the hour. Thanks so much for watching as we continue to follow all of the live updates that are happening in real time.